Job's an interesting book. There's a lot in there, and I think we kind of need one or two little key pointers so that we're able to work out what it's about. And I hope to touch on those tonight. One thing that I'd encourage you to do at some stage is read Job right through. It takes a couple of hours, but so does a novel. But when you read it all the way through, you'll find that there's things that come up, and I've done it myself, and there's a couple of things that in the end of the book of Job seem quite random, but they're actually picked up throughout the book if you do an entire read. So if you've got time to do that, I'm sure you can make it. Have a look at just reading Job right through at some stage. Okay, so my subject is actually Job, why did he suffer? And to make that clear, we're going to go through Job just quickly, touch on a few of the more salient points, and then at the end I'll go through and give you the exact reasons as to why Job did suffer. There's four main themes in Job. There's, of course, suffering, there's providence, there's prayer, and finally there's grace. You know, I don't often equate grace with the book of Job, do we? But it's there in God's answer at the end, because it was that highlighted to Job, after all he had been through, how dependent he was on that. So we start out with this man who's very rich, and it seems that from his beginnings he was a very righteous man. But he was righteous primarily through his works. He wanted to be seen as someone who did works. He wanted to be seen as someone who was justified by his righteousness instead of justified by God. And along with this went a little bit of pride, what we might call a sediment of pride. And Job, he had a nice, if you looked at Job, he was nice and clear. But if you shook him up, it brought a different character to the surface. And that's what we get with Job. And one of the reasons why we read that chapter 29 is we get Job telling us what he was like, what he did. I did this, I did that, I don't deserve this, I've done this, and this. But we know that faith without works isn't all there, and works without faith isn't going to make it all there either. But Job had a problem, and that he couldn't join those two together. He knew about faith. He never lost his faith in God throughout the entire story. But he felt justified by his works. And it's only in the end, when God brings in this element of grace and says, despite how hard you work, Job, despite what you've done, despite your faith in me, despite your righteousness, you must still need my grace. And God teaches Job that very gently and carefully compared to what Job's been through. So we read in chapter 1, there was a day, verse 6, when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came almost among them. Okay? Now we're just going to have a quick look at Satan here, because I know it sometimes seems something that's difficult to understand or difficult to explain, but we know that Satan couldn't be a supernatural devil, a supernatural adversary. And there's several reasons for this, and we find this right in the text here, is that he is, despite being the adversary, which is simply what the word Satan means, he didn't have any power of himself. And sure, God says to him, okay, you can go and do that, but God gives him the power to do it. Okay, so we know it can't be a supernatural devil from hell or whatever else, and we'll look at a couple of other passages that show you that here, right in this chapter. And it also couldn't be an angel, because angels cannot lie. And this particular adversary was telling a lie. So it leaves really only one option, and that is a man or a woman. That's the only option we have left. But we might ask then, well, how could a man do the things he did? Bring fire down from heaven, create an east wind. Third one was to strike Job with boils. How could he do that? Well, it's simply a miracle. I say simply a miracle, but it's a miracle. James and John wanted to call fire down from heaven. They were men. Elijah did call fire down from heaven, and he was definitely a man. So there's no reason why it has to be anything other than a man. And he was a man that was wrong. Come over the page, depending on what sort of Bible you got. He says there, in verse 11, put forth thine hand. Actually, I'll just go back to context for verse 9. Then the adversary answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not made an hedge about him and about his house and about all that he hath on every side? You're looking after him, he says. You've blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And he was wrong. He thought he was right, but he was wrong. And that never happened. And the Lord said unto Satan, or the adversary, behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thy hand. Okay? And so we learn that Job loses his livestock and his servants and his sons and his daughters. But look at how they're lost. The oxen were ploughing, and the Sabians came and took them away. Well, it wasn't done by a supernatural means. It was just an incitement to people to come and take something away. Pick up the next one. The Chaldeans fell upon the camels and have carried them and thy servants away. Man-made catastrophes. While he was yet speaking, there came another, and the sons and daughters were eating in the house. This is verse 18. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and smote the house. So all of these things, they're not coming from the adversary. They're not coming up from hell. They're coming simply in a space like that. And I believe that there's no reason why this adversary couldn't have been one of those who were called the sons of God. And there's no reason why Job could not have been at these meetings when the sons of God came to present themselves. Because Job was into doing works, and turning up to meetings was his stick. Job probably knew who the adversary was, but he never knew what he did. And so the adversary says again, verse 3, God says again, I'll just pick this up just before we go on to that. In chapter 1, verse 22, observe this verse. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Important. They come again, Satan says, the adversary says further down, but now put forth thine hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to your face. And the Lord said unto the adversary, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. Okay? So again, if this was a supernatural devil, we've got a real problem there, because God is giving him power to do something. Is that reasonable? You can't have these supposed two opposing forces, but one is supplied their power by the other. It's nonsensical. And so he does that. And then we come to verse 10 of here. He says, his wife says to him, dost thou retain your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? And notice this, in all this, did not Job sin with his lips? Now, what's different between chapter 2, verse 10 and chapter 1, verse 22? Can you tell the difference there? Job's starting to struggle. This is the turning point for Job. He's starting to buckle under this pressure, as he well should have. He was a man. And so he comes to, and this is why, and that's a clue as to why he gets into chapter 3. And just before that, we have the three friends turn up: Eliphaz, the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, and they made an appointment together to come to mourn him and to comfort him. Now, when you read through the entire book of Job and these particular men's interactions with him, I can't be sure of it. It does seem to appear that they seem to have had interaction with Job in perhaps a business manner. He knew them and their wisdom and the likes. They knew each other. But it seems when you read through that they seem to know each other for a reason. Not just because they were all a bit, one came from over here and one came from over there. They seem to have had some transaction or some dealings with Job in the past. So they're friends, but friends who know Job well enough to know what he is like as a person over some years. And at this time, for those who are interested, I believe Job was at this time 100 years old. And I'll tell you why later on. There's not conclusive, but very strong or very suggestive evidence as to why he is. So he's not a young man. He's an older, wiser man, and he's had, many years to build up his acquisitions, his family, his servants, his livestock. He's not just NASDAQ new money kind of guy. He's been at the grind for a long time. So in chapter 3, Job opens his mouth, there go his lips, and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night which I was conceived, there is a man, which it was said there was a man-child conceived. And won't read all through all of that because pretty much every verse is very similar. He's taking the same thing. He's saying, yes, it would just, for where I am now, it just really would have been better if I just wasn't born at all. And then he says here, and this one too is telling, in verse 25 of chapter 3, For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. What was Job afraid of? Back in chapter 1, we'll just go back here for a second. Verse 5, and so his sons and daughters went to different places, and when they were gone to have a feast, then Job sent and sacrificed and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of all of them. So 10 burnt offerings because he had 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. For Job said, It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. And it says Job did this continually. So what was on Job's mind, the thing that he feared, was that he mightn't work hard enough to sanctify his children. And now they're gone, because his sanctification couldn't save them. He goes on there at the last verse of chapter 3. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came. He's saying, I didn't have rest. I just kept going all the time. I kept doing all these things, going into the gate of the city, feeding the widows, helping the orphans, sacrificing for my children. Over and over and over and over and over. And Job filled his life with these works. And along comes this tragedy, and Job is shaken. Absolutely shaken to the core. It's been taken from him, yes, everything he physically has. But more so, what's been taken from Job is his unshakable belief that if he kept doing works and doing works and doing works, God would bless him. And he thought he had that right. And now we come to chapter 4, and this is where one of the friends, Eliphaz, he starts up. You can probably say this actually reads, the book of Job actually reads somewhat like a legal case. All right? Like, I don't know what they call them these days, pericoma or something. That's not these days. Perry Mason, yeah. They both like to wear white. So what you've got, I'll just do this on the board quickly because we can't read the whole of Job. You have Job's catastrophes in the start, and then you have Job's lamentation about being not born. Then you have Eliphaz, Job answers. Bildad, Job answers. Zophar, Job answers. All right, and then it goes back to the beginning. Eliphaz, Job answers. Bildad, Job answers. Zophar, Job answers. Eliphaz again. Then half of Bildad. He really ran out of things to say. And Zophar had nothing to say. And at that point, we have this Elihu come into the situation. And he goes through until God comes, he goes through a few chapters until God comes in. God gives Job one little chance to say something, and then God finishes off. I know that just looks like letters on the board, but it's going in question, answer, or plaintiff, defence, plaintiff, defence, plaintiff, defence, all the way through it. If you remember that, it's actually quite easy to see where you are if you're reading Job piecemeal in December. Okay? It's quite sensible and easy to understand when you put it in that way. And so the likes of Eliphaz here says, as I've described it a bit like here, as a legal case, it's been said that the friends had a bad case, argued well, and Job had a good case, argued badly. And you can pick some of that up as you go through, all right? So anyway, all of that doesn't really mean much anymore. You've got the idea of that. That's the arguments as they go through. So the likes of it, we pick up in chapter 4, and we have in here, Eliphaz says to Job, "Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off?" Is that true? No, it's not true. What's an example that Eliphaz should have known? Hebrews, let's flick over to Hebrews 11. 11, well, we will find who? Abel. We will find Abel, who was told that he was righteous, but he was slain. Don't bother going to Hebrews 11, we'll save time. Okay, so righteous Abel, who was slain in the beginning. He's wrong here. He thought he had a good argument because his argument was based on what we call automatic attribution. You sin, God gets you. Immediately. Every sin you do, God gets you. Usually immediately. And that's wrong, isn't it? That is simply wrong philosophy. And this is what comes through in their arguments. And this is one of their main arguments, their chief arguments, is that, Job, you can only be suffering this badly because you've messed up big. Tell us what you've done. Because Job hadn't. In fact, God calls him righteous. Back in chapter 1, he calls him a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. And God says that twice. And throughout the entire book of Job, despite Job stumbling, God still says that. And at the very end, if we mightn't get time to have a look at this, but at the very end, he calls Job my servant. Not once, twice. So he's driving home that point to make sure that these people understand that he was a righteous man. Let's just take another example from Eliphaz. Shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his maker? What sort of argument is that? Of course, Job was never declaring to be that. So these are sort of things that come up. Another one, verse 19 of chapter 5. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7 there shall no evil touch thee. That's wrong. That's a lie. Because Job was perfect, but he'd had not just one little trouble, but an enormous calamity of things come upon him. So it's not true. So why then do you think we would have so many untruths by these men recorded for us in the Bible? Why are they there? Why not just have righteous Job and him basically say the right things and we get 100% pure, good, edifying, useful scripture? Why? Why do these men speak up? Why are their arguments relevant? Exactly. So we know what's wrong, and because their arguments are our arguments. Yeah, it's common wisdom. And it's our human nature that argues like this. So God's put it in there to contrast one with the other. And so when we read it out, we bring it out, we go, that's wrong. Someone asked me last week why so-and-so was suffering, and I told them what Eliphaz said. I was wrong. Because we think like that. It's in our nature to try and justify things and say, I've got a cold, I don't deserve it. I've got a broken leg, I don't deserve it. God must be punishing me for something. No. Not at all. We might just quickly have a look at suffering. There are two broad types of suffering, okay? You've got what I'll call natural, and we've got God-derived. Okay? Now these, I'm going to draw large titles, but self-inflicted, yep. I'll get to that one. We've got natural causes, and we've got God-originated causes. These are where suffering comes from. Number one, our nature. We are of Adam. Which answers your question, yeah? Yes, exactly. It's our nature. Secondly, there are calamities. A hurricane goes through Vanuatu. Yep, calamity. Flood goes through Queensland. Fire goes through somebody's house. Calamities. Third one is other people, known as crime. Okay? People doing bad things to other people. Under this one, that's basically, they're broad, and you can probably draw more lines and break them down. You can do floods, fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever you want to do. But under here, we have two. One is punishment, and the other is trial. Okay? So they're the two types of suffering and broad things that they will fall into. Sometimes we don't know which is which, and we don't really need to know why or which is which. If your house had burned down, would you really want to know that God didn't like the wallpaper? It wouldn't do anything for your life. So we have to be a little bit open about how we approach these. And of course, down in these things here, we have the way God works. We can say, have a look at the last verse of chapter 5. He says, Eliphaz says there, "Lo, this, we have searched it, for so it is, hear it, and know thou it for thy good." So he's trying his last-ditch effort to say, we've had a look into this. And we've done a little bit of research, and I think you better perhaps acknowledge our wisdom in the matter. All right? Wrong. Absolutely wrong again. Isaiah 55. I'm just going to tell you where it is. in case the people listening online want to write it down. Verse 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So it's very difficult to put God in a box with our human parameters, our boundaries, our understanding of infinity and time. That actually comes up in chapter 42 when he's, I think it's verse 9, when he's talking about his might. So, alright, I'm not going to spend much time going through any more of that because I've told you, and basically most of the arguments are going to go along the same way. Job comes back, tries to justify himself, saying, hey, no, I haven't done anything wrong, all I've done is good. And so it goes back and forth like that. It's very interesting. It would actually make a really good play. It wouldn't be, high action. You'd be having people sitting around and reading parts and things like that, but it'd still be a really good way to demonstrate it and get it across. So there you go, there's a job for you, Matt. So here he is. Here is Job. He's been through all of this, and we actually just try and pick it up in verse, it's actually in Job, I think it's Job's, chapter 29, as we read tonight. We sometimes ask the question, like, what was going on here and that sort of thing. There was a day to present, they came to present themselves before God. Then we have again, there was another day to present themselves before God. And then we've got Job sitting here for some time after that. How long was it? There's absolutely nothing conclusive. We can't say it was this or that. We do have a tiny, tiny clue in the reading we did today in chapter 29 and verse 2, where he says, "Oh, that I were as in past months, as in the days when God preserved me." So he's been in this state for months. And then we have a very interesting character come into the story. And here's Job sitting down on the ash heap, or is it on the ash heap with on the rubbish heap, the rubbish dump. And he's scraping down his body with potsherds. Potsherds are just broken bits of pottery. They didn't have glue to stick them back together back then. They just had to make a whole new one. All right? Every time. And they broke all the time. So they were continually throwing these things out. And of course, archaeologists today literally have a field day with it. So here's Job sitting out there like that. And in comes this guy in chapter 32. Now, I've got a little question for you here. I've got to wind up soon. I've got a little question for you here. We read there, "Then was kindled the wrath of Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite of the kindred of Ram, against Job." Now, he's the fourth guy who comes in. How is he different from the first three? These little things, when you're studying Scripture, when they pop up, grab a hold of them and go and have a look at what it is. What's that? Angry. Yep. It is Eliphaz the Bildad the Zophar the Naamathite. Okay? And then we come to Elihu, and it says, Elihu the son of Barachel. Whenever you see something like that in Scripture, alarms go off. All right? And simply here, when this happens, all we have to do to get this just crazy insight as to what was going on is go and have a look at these names. I've written them down so I don't have to look them up. Elihu, he is my God. Barachel, son of the God that blesses. Buz, or Buzite, the contempt, and then Ram of the lofty. Here is Job reduced to this state that he is. And along comes this guy whose name is, he is my God, son of the God that blesses, the contempt of the lofty. You can imagine Job sitting there and sees this guy coming towards him, and he's going, Oh boy. Oh boy. I'm going to get it now. And Elihu, in all of his speeches, he starts off really getting stuck into a lot of them. And he says, chapter 32 says here, so these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. And they weren't altogether wrong. They had been wrong on other things, but they weren't altogether wrong on that one. And so in comes Elihu, and Elihu is right. All his arguments are right. And then he's cut short when God comes in. Like all the things that happened before, in comes God in a whirlwind. In a whirlwind. And says, and this is a question asked last week, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, and I will demand of thee, and you answer me. Yes, Paul. Yep. Why he was wrong? Yeah, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth. The wicked might be shaken out of it. Verse 13 of which chapter, sorry? 32, sorry, I'm at 38. Yep. Verse 13, 32, yes. Lest ye should say, when we have found out wisdom, God thrusteth him down, not man. Yes. Yeah. And he also didn't know, he didn't know the beginning of the story either. And also, the adversary in the beginning is never held accountable for his actions either. That's the way it goes on. But this question here, who is this that darkeneth counsel? God comes along and says that, and it's sometimes asked, is that Elihu, who is darkening the counsel, or is it Job? The answer is in chapter 42, verse 13. When God's still talking to Job, and he gives him this brief window in which to talk. Sorry, not 42, sorry, 40, chapter 40, verse 3. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth. Once I have spoken, but will not answer. Yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. That's the answer. Job says that he's darkened the counsel. We come to this chapter, and there's some wonderful things that God says as he goes through here. And he sort of comes along to Job and he goes, go and check out the ostrich. And what about the behemoth? And have you considered the horse or the eagle? That's red herring. Where's this coming from? Well, it's actually coming from Job's reason in other chapters. I'll just give you, for time's sake, one, chapter 9, verse 9. Excuse me. You can edit those out. Chapter 9, verse 9, Job 9:9. He says there, which maketh Arcturus, Orion, Pleiades, the chambers of the south. And then you go over to our chapter which we were in before, chapter 38, verse 31. God says, can you really bind the sweet influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth out of his season? Or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? So Job is actually getting a bit of his medicine back. All right, so God's sorting him out there. I just want to quickly go to two things. One is, I want to just quickly go through why Job suffered. But before I do that, I just want to have a look at Job very briefly in the end here. Chapter 42, verse 11. His friends and acquaintances and brothers and sisters come to him and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord brought upon him. Another acknowledgement of where this came from. It didn't come from supernatural devil. It didn't come from angels. It came from God via a man. And so every man gave him some money there. Three friends are commanded to take sacrifices to Job. And when they did, then Job was blessed. All right, because he was doing the sacrifices of forgiveness. And so he got twice as many camels as he had before, and twice as many donkeys, and twice as many sheep, and the same amount of kids. Does that sound fair? Why do you only get the same amount of kids? The resurrection. Job believed in the resurrection. Chapter 14, verse 14. You might like to mark these. Chapter 14, verse 14. So Job would have known this. If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change come. There's another well-known one. Does anybody remember what it is? Chapter 19, verse 25. Chapter 19, verse 25. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. After my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh, physical flesh, not soul wafting up to heaven, in his physical flesh, he will see God again. And he actually says this at the end of Job here. Here I beseech thee, he says to God, I will demand of thee and declare unto thee, I have heard thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. God was in a whirlwind. But Job had gone through this process and now he saw God. I want to finish off just with the question, why did Job suffer? Because it is the topic. Thank you very much, Ollie. Don't expect a Christmas card. Sarah. Okay, the first one was to number one was to silence the adversary. I get ahead of myself. God wanted to say, that's wrong. And he did. Number two, he wants to, again, the friends, he wants to teach the friends, and of course, recorded in the Bible, he also wants to teach us. Number three, is to reveal Job's character. I'm not writing very neatly because I can't see very neatly. And to bless Job, because Job, having gone through these things, was able to appreciate the blessing that he wouldn't have been able to. And he blessed him with wealth, he blessed him with family, he blessed him with a whole range of things. 5, to teach patience. Right? If you ever want to know what the book of Job is all about, the Bible tells you. James 5:11, okay? Tells you what Job's about. 6, that suffering leads to joy. James also addresses this, leads to joy. And finally, 7, number 2, that God is always worthy. All right. And you can look that up, 13 verse 15, but I'm going to wrap it up. That's enough. Last little thing I want to leave with you is that there are a lot of these things that we don't understand in our lives and about suffering and things like that. I'm just going to give you one little thing to take away with you that will help you understand Job as well as some of life's situations. And you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to say it in the absolute. Okay? By the absolute, I mean there are obviously exceptions to this. But I'm going to say it in the absolute because I want it to hit you and you to remember it. And it's this. God is not interested in your life. He's interested in you. And that's why God can put Job through all of this. Because God can see the end. And he's working on you. And in his spare time, he's working on me. And that's what he wants. Yes, sure, he's very interested in how you live your life and how you behave it. But not nearly as much as he is in you. I'll leave that with you. Thank you for your time.
Right. Well, thanks, Joel, for taking us through that very challenging book, isn't it, Job? And as Joel has brought out to us, it's really an exchange of thoughts. And if you take chapters at random without following the line of thought, you end up with the wrong answers in some ways, because it's one of those books where you can grab one of the chapters where one of his friends is suggesting what's the problem, and if you quote that, then the answer is going to be wrong because later they're corrected. So you really got to read it, as Joel was saying, in slabs, so you get the thrust and parry of the argument, and that's why it's a little challenging, but fascinating book. And as we well know too, it brings us to those majestic chapters at the end where the power of God is compared to the smallness of man. I think anyone got a question or an observation? Thank you, Paul. I'll bring the mic down to you.
Thanks, Joel. That was one of the most interesting talks I've heard about Job. I note your list there, and I think, unless I interpret one of them a little more broadly, I think you've missed one. And that is that the bottom line is God wants to make the best of us he can. Hebrews 12. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when you are reproved by him, for the Lord disciplines those he loves. What he was trying to do with Job was teach him those things, but make him the best he could be. Now, he was already a righteous man and a good man, but he wanted to make him better if he could. And it's the same with us. The Lord will work with us, and he will try us and push us to the edge, not more than we can bear, until we are the best we can be. Which, in my case, might be something pretty ordinary. In your case, it might be wonderful. But he wants us to be the best we can. And I think that's what Job, in one sense, is all about.
Yeah. I think in that, I understand what you're saying. It's not entirely covered by this, but he wanted to reveal Job's character. God just doesn't want to just show us up for duffers. He can do that all day, every day. He wants to show our faults and our flaws so that he can do something with that. So to me, it's kind of in that. He's revealing Job's character to say, Job, you fancy you're doing a bit of work on this area? Because you're lacking something a bit there. I've brought out, you're doing some stuff well, but you just might want to work on that area. But yeah, I get your point, that he absolutely wants us to be the best that we are, which is why I made the point at the end, he's interested in you, not just...
And I noticed at the end you got that. One more point, Roddy. You took us to Isaiah 55, to that wonderful point that so many people use and make, and that is, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, etc., etc. You notice the first word, for, which implies that it's talking about something that just went before.
Yes.
So we have to read what's before.
We go to that context of before,
which says, let the wicked forsake his way, the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him. And to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. That's why his thoughts are above our thoughts. That's why he's so far above us, because he forgives. And I think that is primarily the meaning behind those words, and not the fact that, his thoughts are just so far beyond us, we just have to stand there with our mouth open.
And he's forgiven.
It's all about forgiveness.
He's forgiven us before we even start.
Well,
he gave us his Son, who said himself, there are those in the world that have not even known me yet. I thank you that you have saved them. That's a part of that grace.
I think my comments are a bit along the lines of what Paul was talking about before. But can I ask a question? Is, in the end, what does Job get out of this? Right? Is Job any more obedient than he was before? Yeah? Humility? Yeah. But what makes him more humble? Correct. And I think one of the huge learnings in this is that right from the beginning, when you look at what Job is doing, he's doing lots of good things out of fear and things like that.
Different motivation.
But what he really ends up learning through the tail end of the book is God.
He says, now I see you.
That's right.
I don't see my
And
works, I
that's,
see you.
that's the huge learning for Job, is that he now actually knows who God is. And God is really saying, you obey me,
Yeah.
but you don't really know me.
Yeah.
And he actually reveals him.
Yeah.
And that's when he goes, whoa,
Yeah.
I now understand.
And James speaks to this as well in his epistle, and he goes through it. And I didn't have time to have a look at how many times the word works come up in James, but it's amazing how many parallels, even oblique ones, there are between James and Job. You can do that next semester.
It's quite powerful. Anyway, the other thing was you mentioned 3 other themes, and perhaps those 3 themes can appear later at some stage, as in I think it was grace, prayer, and providence.
Yeah, it's all tied up in that, but we're only speaking to the one of them, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's also, I'll just say quickly, it's also noting, I didn't go into this, but I will just go into it very, very quickly. When you have a look at all these characters and the timelines and everything else in Job, Job is probably written around the time of Joseph. And it's probably, there's no evidence for it, but people sort of say, well, who else? It's probably written by Moses. And that's written before the first 5 books of the Bible. So the point is that the very first thing that God wrote down to explain to the world his plan and his purpose was this challenging book. You imagine going, okay, we're going preaching campaign. We've got 1 book, let's go. Job. We've got to explain that to people. And as you go through that, you will see that God said, yes, there is salvation in there. There is human failing in there. There is the mess up from Eden. There is human reasoning being sidelined by God's reasoning. All in the book of Job. You imagine, the Bible had to start somewhere, but that's all it started with. How challenging would that be? And if that's all you've got, and it's the Word of God, you're probably going to look into it and try and unravel a lot of it.
All right, any other observations you'd like to make, or we'll wrap up? Yes. Oh, yes, yeah, the 100 years old bit, yeah.
Sorry, yep. Okay. Genesis chapter 6. Sorry, I threw in a lot of little...
You got more sons of God in there.
Yeah, more sons of God in there. Okay, Genesis chapter 6, verse 3. The Lord said, my spirit will not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Okay? Now you go back over to Job, last chapter, verse 16, second last verse. After this, Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons even to the 4th generation. So if you've got all that doubling in there, 140 plus 100 is 2 times 120. Make sense?
Hang about. Didn't you say he was 100 years old? What do you mean?
If he was 100 years old when he suffered...
Oh, 100 years old when he suffered. Okay,
when he suffered,
okay, all right.
and then he lived
Yeah.
140 years
140.
more, it's 240,
240,
which is 2 times 120, which means even his age doubled as well as his camels and his
Compared
kids.
to the average age at that time.
Yeah.
Okay, fair call. All right then, well, we'll conclude on that point.